They said the tree was a liability. That's what the letter claimed. The oak my father planted 40 years ago had become a safety hazard. They demanded I cut it down or face daily fines. That tree had shaded every birthday, every summer dinner, every memory we'd built in this house. It was older than most of the homes here, but the HOA didn't see history. They saw non-compliance. And when they forced me to destroy it, I thought I'd lost everything. But then the storm came, and that's when they learned what real liability looks like. For almost 2 decades, Daniel Reeves had been the model neighbor. High school science teacher, soft-spoken, a man who fixed squeaky gates before anyone asked. He and his wife, Marla, ran their lives on patience, not pride. Their teenage daughter, Ella, was the kind who'd wave to every passing dog walker and leave thank you notes for the mail carrier. Their home, in Maple Glen Estates, sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, framed by manicured lawns and cloned mailboxes, a neighborhood that prized perfection almost more than kindness. In the center of Daniel's yard stood the oak tree, a living monument. His father had planted it the week Daniel was born, a sapling barely taller than a shovel. Over 4 decades, it had grown into a towering canopy, its branches stretching wide like open arms. Summers were measured by its shade. Winters, by the sound of wind threading through its limbs. It wasn't just wood and leaves. It was continuity. A reminder that roots could hold a family steady, even when life didn't. The HOA, however, saw it differently. At first, it was minor. A note taped to the mailbox. Please trim branches obstructing the sidewalk. Reasonable enough. Daniel pruned them a month later. Overgrowth continues to pose visibility concerns. Then, tree must be evaluated for removal. That's when Greg Mason entered the picture, the HOA president. Late 50s, pressed khakis, a permanent frown he mistook for authority. Greg loved rules the way other men loved sports. His house was identical to everyone else's. By design, his design. When Daniel first met him at a community picnic, Greg had introduced himself with a handshake that felt like a legal warning. We keep order around here. That's why Maple Glen stays Maple Glen. At the time, Daniel laughed it off, but then came the violation letters. $500, then $750. The tone sharpened with each one. Failure to comply may result in enforcement action. Daniel called, emailed, even sent photos. The oak was healthy. He had an arborist's report to prove it. The city's environmental office backed him up. But the HOA didn't care about city reports. They cared about optics. At the next meeting, Daniel tried again. He explained how the tree cooled homes, absorbed runoff, and anchored the soil. Greg folded his arms. This isn't a biology class, Mr. Reeves. It's about aesthetics. The vote was 4-1. Removal approved. Daniel walked home that night under the rustling canopy, his daughter skipping ahead, her laughter echoing through branches soon marked for death. He looked up and whispered to the leaves, "I'm sorry." The first contractor arrived 3 days later. Daniel turned them away, showing them the arborist's certificate. The men shrugged. They were just hired hands. An hour later, an HOA email hit his inbox. Obstruction of authorized service is a violation of Section 5.7. So he did what teachers do. He documented everything. Dates, times, emails, photos. He filed an appeal. It was denied within 48 hours. Marla begged him to drop it. "It's not worth the stress," she said. But he couldn't. He'd watched too many small people get crushed by big systems pretending to protect them. Then came the public humiliation. Fluorescent orange notice of violation sign appeared on his lawn, hammered into the ground like a stake. It read, "Unapproved vegetation. Immediate removal required." Neighbors slowed their cars, whispering. Some offered quiet sympathy. Others avoided eye contact. One evening, his daughter came home from school crying. Someone's parent had said the Reeves were getting sued by the neighborhood. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat by the window watching moonlight scatter across the oak's branches, the same way it had since childhood. He remembered building a swing there with his father, the two of them laughing as they tied the rope too short and had to start over. The next morning, another letter. Final notice. Removal scheduled for June 14th. Non-compliance fines will accrue daily. June 14th. He circled the date on the calendar and read, the following week. He tried one last time. A town hall meeting, a plea for reason. He brought charts showing property values higher because of mature trees. He quoted city environmental policy. Greg smiled like he'd already won. We're not anti-tree, Mr. Reeves. We're pro-community standards. When the vote reconfirmed removal, a few neighbors clapped politely. Daniel walked out without a word. That night the wind picked up, small gusts whistling through the branches. The oak creaked, ancient and alive, as if warning him that storms come in many forms. June 14th, at 8 a.m., 2 white trucks rolled up the street. Orange cones, hard hats, chainsaws. Greg Mason arrived minutes later, clipboard in hand, posture like a general marching to victory. Daniel was already outside, arms crossed. This is harassment. Greg didn't blink. This is enforcement. Neighbors gathered quietly, drawn by the sound of engines idling. Children clutched their parents' legs. Someone filmed on a phone. The first cut was always the hardest to hear. The saw screamed, biting through bark older than the man who ordered it. Marla gasped, covering her mouth. Ella buried her face in her mother's shoulder. Branches crashed down like gunfire, scattering leaves across the street. The smell of sap filled the air, sharp, raw, heartbreaking. When the trunk split, Daniel felt it in his chest. Every vibration echoed years of laughter, picnics, lazy summer afternoons. Gone. By noon, the oak lay in pieces, limbs stacked like a crime scene. Greg signed the paperwork, turned to Daniel and said casually, "Now your lawn matches the others. You'll thank me come appraisal season." He walked away before Daniel could answer. That evening, Daniel stayed outside long after dark, raking the sawdust into a neat pile. He found a small piece of trunk the size of his palm, the heartwood still warm, and carried it inside. He placed it on the mantel like an urn. The next day, the temperature hit 96 degrees. Without the oak's shade, the living room felt like an oven. The AC ran nonstop. Electricity bill tripled. Marla whispered, "It's like the house can't breathe anymore." A week later, one final insult. A $250 fine for failure to remove stump remains. Daniel paid it in silence, but deep down, he felt something shift, the kind of quiet resolve that doesn't fade. Then July 3rd arrived, and with it the storm. Meteorologists called it a once-in-a-decade wind event. Winds over 80 miles per hour. Sudden lightning strikes. Streets flooded in minutes. The sky turned greenish-black. Thunder rolled like artillery. Daniel stood at the window, watching trees thrash violently. His yard, empty, naked, and absorbed the full force. Across the street, Greg's property swayed under the weight of a massive pine tree, one that had leaned dangerously for years but never been trimmed. At 8:42 p.m., lightning split the sky. The gust that followed hit like a freight train. The pine snapped at its base, a cannon blast of cracking wood, and came down directly onto Greg Mason's roof. The impact was seismic. Windows shattered 3 houses away. Car alarms blared. Power lines sparked and hissed. From his doorway, Daniel saw it all. The roof peeled open like paper, rain pouring straight into Greg's living room. He ran out, rain drenching his shirt, debris pelting his face. Greg stood in the driveway, frozen, soaked, staring up at the destruction. His SUV was crushed, his office gone. Firefighters arrived within minutes, sirens howling through the storm. One shouted over the wind, "That windbreak across the street could have saved you." Greg looked up and across the road, at the empty patch where Daniel's oak once stood. For the first time, Daniel saw fear in the man's eyes. Not fear of fines or control, but the realization that he'd destroyed his own protection. The storm raged for another hour. When it finally passed, Maple Glen looked like a war zone. Branches, shingles, debris everywhere. Except Daniel's house. Not a single broken window. Not one loose shingle. The oak's absence had left wind currents unobstructed, diverting the brunt away from his property and straight toward Greg's. Nature's geometry, poetic and merciless. The next morning, the street was filled with reporters, utility trucks, and whispers. Neighbors pointed, murmuring, "If that oak were still there, he made him cut it down." Greg tried to speak to Daniel as crews patched his roof tarp. This isn't your fault," he stammered. Daniel just looked at him, calm, rainwater dripping from the brim of his cap. "No," he said quietly. "It's yours. Then he walked back inside. By noon, the story was on local news. HOA ordered resident to remove historic oak. Storm destroys. HOA president's home weeks later. Photos of Greg's crushed roof circulated online next to shots of Daniel's empty yard. Hashtags trended, hashtag Oak Justice and hashtag HoKarma. The HOA tried damage control. A statement appeared on their website calling it a tragic coincidence. But residents weren't buying it. At the next board meeting, attendance doubled. People demanded accountability. Greg sat pale and silent while homeowners listed every petty rule he'd enforced. Every unnecessary fine, every intimidation letter. By vote of 19-3, he was removed as president. He resigned the next day. A month later, Daniel received a letter. This time, an apology. Read, "The board acknowledges that the removal order for your oak tree was mishandled. Future decisions will involve environmental consultation." He folded it once and set it beside the small block of oak on his mantel. In September, he planted a new sapling, an oak descendant from a local nursery. He and Ella dug the hole together. Marla pressed soil around its base, tears glinting in the evening sun. A small granite marker read, "Some roots run deeper than rules." Over time, the neighborhood began to change. The new HOA president, a retired landscaper, rewrote entire sections of the bylaws. Tree preservation became mandatory. Residents were encouraged, even funded, to plant new greenery. What had started as one man's stand turned into a community's rebirth. Every storm season that followed, neighbors gathered on Daniel's porch, sharing coffee while the wind howled outside. They felt safer there, not because of walls or bylaws, but because of each other. Sometimes Daniel would glance at the new oak. Its branches were still young, but they swayed with the same confidence as the one that came before. He swore he could almost hear a whisper through the leaves, his father's voice saying, "Told you, son." Nature always balances the scales, and in that moment Daniel finally smiled. Not the smile of revenge, but of restoration. They called it a hazard, but the only danger was arrogance. You can cut down a tree, but you can't cut down consequence, because nature keeps receipts. And when the wind finally comes, karma doesn't miss.